Hello everyone, and welcome back to my reading of the books in Uru, Ages Beyond Mist. I'm G, and today we are up here on this little rooftop. What I'm thinking, there are a lot of books up here, so what I'm thinking is that we will start with the books about the various kings, and then after doing the books about the various kings, we will delve into the books about the various anthropological aspects of DRC study of the Denis. So, let us begin. King Rhinaref. Rhinaref was born in 207 BE, before Earth, on Garternay. He was accepted into the Guild of Writers at the age of 5, standard age, and as the years passed, quickly became one of the finest writers that the Rhône had ever seen. Certain records go as far as stating that Rhinaref was unsurpassed in skill by any other writer of the day, taken from the memoirs of Ailish. By the time he was 90, Rhinaref had achieved the rank of Guildmaster and was well on his way to become the Grandmaster. However, due to personal convictions, he never achieved that rank. Rhinaref had long been a challenger of the views of the Guild of Writers, as well as the king himself. Rhinaref was apparently very concerned with the society's views pertaining to the purpose of writing, and the challenge of acting responsibly with the great gift given to us by Yavo. From the Oath of the New Guild of Writers written by Rhinaref. Around 73 BE, Rhinaref was asked by the Grandmaster to write a descriptive book to a questionable age, at least in the eyes of Rhinaref. He perceived the age to being used to house an uncivilized race that could be used for the purposes of the Rhône. Thus, Rhinaref refused to carry out the command from his Grandmaster, and, after much debating, was apparently dismissed from the Guild of Writers. Some records do point to Rhinaref willfully excusing himself from the guild, although regardless of how he left, much of the society found the dismissal unfair, and some even went so far as to call it detrimental to society. Taken from the journals of Grandmaster Najun of the Guild of Legislators. Around 59 BE, the fact that Gardernay would not be able to serve the Rhône as a home for much longer was confirmed, and the information made public. Gardernay's sun was dying and would eventually cause a rapid decrease in temperature, making it an uninhabitable age. Rhinaref had long known of the state of Gardernay, and from the time of his dismissal had apparently been working on an age that he felt would be a good place to live for those who wished to follow him. According to various journals, Rhinaref managed to attract a few thousand Rhône and convince them to follow him in the ways that he felt important and to the age that he had written. The king allowed Rhinaref to split away from the Rhône, along with a few other smaller groups, while the majority of Rhône left Gardernay to a new home world called Terrani. Rhinaref took his group to Earth, where he established the Denis, meaning New Beginning. Rhinaref was a strong leader, immediately establishing himself as king and reigning for 120 years until his death. Obviously, those who followed Rhinaref to Denis already respected him enough to separate themselves from their family and friends, and thus records point to very few debates or disagreements within the society under the reign of Rhinaref. As had always been the case with Rhône, the group of surveyors was sent to Denis before the group officially moved there to establish the Great Zero and the line emanating from it. The Great Zero itself was usually based on a more prominent natural landmark within an age. From the Great Zero, a line was drawn, usually toward magnetic north, to aid in navigation, construction, etc. A monument was built on the Great Zero in the year 0 DE. Unlike previous occasions, Rhinaref established the line of the Great Zero as set apart for holy buildings without authorization by the reigning king. Construction was forbidden. Though it's never stated directly, records strongly imply that it was Rhinaref who chose where the city would be established. He seemed to base his decision on two factors, which probably made the decision an easy one. First was the line of the Great Zero. It seemed an obvious spot to base the city, with the most important religious structures being directly on the line and the rest of the city surrounding its center. The second factor was a group of waterfalls that flowed from the ceiling of the cavern to an area adjacent to the line of the Great Zero. The fresh flowing water was perfect for drinking. A new writers' guild with fairly different rules than the one that had existed on Gardernay was constructed almost immediately, 8 DE, under the direction of Rhinaref. By the year 100 DE, Rhinaref had directed the recreation of the 18 major guilds. It should be noted that the 18 major guilds of Denis were not necessarily the same as the 18 that had existed on Gardernay. In fact, they were probably much different. Though there is no information that details the major guilds of Gardernay, we do know that the guilds were meant to be flexible and serve the people in the needs of their time. The guilds were dedicated to Yavo on the Day of the Circle, a celebration not only of the completion of the major guilds, but a celebration of new guilds, which Rhinaref believed were healthier than those that existed on Gardernay. Guilds that have been established to please Yavo and not themselves, Rhinaref said. taken from a transcript of Rhinaref's speech on the first day of the circle. Certain records point to the guilds on Gardernay becoming extremely competitive with one another and focusing more upon having the best facility than carrying out their duty to Yavo and the people. In an effort to curb that kind of competition, Rhinaref implemented a list of restrictions upon guild construction. The restrictions included guidelines pertaining to placement, facing the Great Zero, size, shape, and minor visual guidelines. Though one of Rhinaref's top priorities was construction of a temple, there were disagreements as to specifics, causing numerous delays in the finalization of construction plans. Eventually, construction was started in 48 DE, and the temple was completed in 63 DE. Known as the Regeltavorum, the temple to Yavo was meant as a place of worship, as well as a reminder of the prophesied great king who would come to them soon. The prophetical work, the Regeltavor of Urpa, a book Rhinaref believed strongly in, dealt with numerous prophecies of a great king who would be sent by Yavo to guide the people. Rhinaref also made it a priority to install massive fans that would supply the cavern with fresh air. Natural openings existed, but it was quickly discovered that they did not supply ample circulation for the cavern. As a result, massive shafts and fans were built and installed over a 30-year period between 84 and 114 DE. It should be noted that numerous records point to a small group of Dani disappearing upon completion of the fans. It is most often assumed that they remained on the surface of Earth to live. Throughout his reign, records point to multiple occasions on which Rhinaref refused to build a palace for himself. Instead, he lived in a fairly basic home, similar in fashion to most of his fellow citizens, and made it especially clear that until Yavo had a new home, he could not allow himself one. Although, even after the temple was completed, Rhinaref refused to build a palace, always focusing more on the religious and government sites. Rhinaref's own philosophy centered on the fact that it was much easier to focus on Yavo and his wishes when circumstances were difficult and struggles more abundant. It was strongly believed that Rhinaref's refusal to build a palace was an expression of that philosophy. In 120 DE, Rhinaref died of apparent heart complications. He was 327 years old. Though he had married, he left no children. As a result, he chose one of his apprentices named Augh to succeed him. King Augh. Augh took the throne in coronation ceremonies in the year 120 DE at the age of 170. Though it seems Augh had never been a member of the Writers' Guild on Gardernay, he had spent the first 50 years of his life with Rhinaref, after his own dismissal, working on the Book of Dani. When the Dani Writers' Guild was formed in the year 8 DE, Rhinaref made sure Augh was placed in charge as the first Grand Master of the Guild. As Grand Master, he had worked closely with Rhinaref in the writing of the new Guild of Writers' Oath. The oath, which was what every member promised to live by, ended up staying in existence, with few minor changes, until 9400 DE. Records indicate that Augh modeled his life very closely to Rhinaref's. He refused to build himself a palace until a common library was opened, and he strongly supported a place where all citizens could have access to books. Though there was some minor disagreement on minor issues, the building was eventually finished in 233 DE, although, like his mentor, Augh still refused to build himself a palace. The reign of Augh was extremely similar to that of Rhinaref. There was still great excitement for the new ideals and laws of Dani, and thus great support for Augh, making his reign a very smooth one. Before his third son was born in 256 DE, records indicate that there was a bit of public apprehension over who the next king would be. Augh's two eldest sons were fairly rebellious and neither seemed good candidates for the throne, at least in the public's opinion. However, as Augh's third son grew, it became apparent to the public, though records never give specific reasons, that the boy closely followed his father's ideals. Augh must have agreed with public opinion, as it was his third son who he selected to succeed him. Augh died of natural causes at the age of 350. King Shomat. Shomat took the throne in the year 300 DE, Dani era, at the age of 44. Up to the point of his coronation, he had been a member of the Guild of Writers. He continued his study of the art through private mentors for a number of years after his coronation. It was the lack of proper guild instruction that most Dani historians attributed the distorted views Shomat later took on. It was an up and down reign, partly due to a tremendous tension that seemed to exist between himself and his older brothers. Both of the brothers, though they had little respect, did everything in their power to make Shomat's reign tumultuous. One of the first actions Shomat ordered was construction of a palace. When it was completed in 347 DE, Shomat moved in with his family, although his brothers refused, and maintained their own homes. Such an act was regarded as a tremendous disrespect to a family and only served to widen the gap between Shomat and his brothers. Furthering tensions not only within Shomat's family, but within the culture as well, was the lavishness of the palace. Ornate gardens were present inside the fiscal grounds, and garden ages were written as well, linking from within the palace. Rumors abounded that some of these garden ages were even wiped of their inhabitants in order to provide Shomat with relaxation. Whether true or not, Shomat often spoke publicly of the need for ages to serve Denis. This was a first for the society and a direct contradiction to what the guilds taught. The Denis were to serve the ages. It seems that eventually the tension became too much. Some say it drove Shomat mad. In 387 DE, both his brothers disappeared and were never found again. It was commonly presumed that Shomat wrote a death book to which both of his brothers were linked into, although it could never be proven. Regardless, it was one of the first major challenges for the people of Denis, and they reacted quickly. A prophetess was supplied to Shomat in 400 DE in an attempt to guide him in the ways of Augh. Women were generally seen as much better communicators with Augh than men. As a result, most prophets were women. The choosing of prophetesses as guides for the kings started with Shomat and became tradition for all the remaining kings of Denis. It was usually up to the king as to which prophet or prophetess he would seek for wisdom. For the 155 remaining years of his reign, it seems that most people believe Shomat became a better king. The prophetess became an excellent mentor for Shomat and eventually convinced him to choose the son of one of his close friends as the heir to the throne. His own children were admittedly out of control. As it turns out, it was the bloodline of that child that led to the birth of the great king years later. Shomat died of natural causes at the age of 299. King Nagan took the throne in 2356 DE at the age of 86. Nagan did much to encourage the growth of the major guild of fine artists, as well as the seeking of the other truths. The year 2500 DE, 1,000 years after the death of the great king, would mark the peak of what some would call the religious confusion, taken from the journal of Tevar in 3075. There were over 2,000 registered sects, and the original beliefs of Rhinaref were known by very few. Nagan was clearly not one of them. It is 2397 DE that most officially marks the start of the Denis Renaissance. In that year, the Amis Theatre Company hosted the first play written by the playwright Sire. The play dealt with the Pento War and the Great King himself, and was one which Nagan praised. It ended up being sold out for 3 straight weeks, and marked not only the start of theater as a popular entertainment source within the culture, but also the beginning of the Pento War subject, which would go on to become one of the most dealt with topics in their history in their art. In 2408 DE, the 33-year-old musician Aram began selling out concert halls, marking the beginning of yet another career of one of the great Denis artists. His music also dealt much with the great king, many times ridiculing him. Nagan praised his people for being able to express their true feelings in such wonderful displays of art, from a speech by Nagan christening the minor guild of musicians. In 2488 DE, the first successful extrusion tests were carried out by the Guild of Miners, and to great applause from the public, Nagan used the occasion to benefit everyone. He was appointed the Guild of Miners as a major guild, replacing the Guild of Fine Artists. He then split the Guild of Fine Artists up into the minor guilds of sculptors, artists, actors, and musicians. The split was to encourage growth in mining as well as the arts, 2 major causes of Nagan through his reign. His proposal was strongly supported by Sire and Aram, as well as other artists who viewed it as an excellent opportunity for the growth of their respective fields. In 2500 DE, Nagan proposed the construction of a new council chamber for the guilds. Somewhat surprising was that he suggested it should be built over the tomb of the great king. The proposal was met with little opposition, and construction began 2 years later. Though the official church registered a complaint, it seemed there was little heart behind it. Apparently, even a prophetess of Nagan supported the proposition. In 2502 DE, the tomb of the great king was barely visible, a tremendous symbol of what Denis had become. Later, it was discovered that within the council chamber was a massive vault protected by puzzles of a sort. The tomb had always been known for its patterns, some of which were claimed to have prophetic messages. Nagan apparently became enamored with the patterns and spread them throughout the unseen portions of the chamber, as well as the scene. Though the public knew very little of the vault at the time of construction years later, it was found to contain 2 tremendous amounts of royal wealth, something Nagan often publicly encouraged. Of course, most were not able to save the amounts Nagan did, but still the idea of saving one's money for future generations was strongly encouraged by him. Nagan died in 2533 DE at the age of 263, leaving the throne to his 3rd son. In memorial to Nagan, Sire wrote another of the more popular of his plays, entitled Our Great King. It was the first play performed by the Minor Guild of Actors in 2535 DE. King Damath took the throne in 4692 DE at the age of 154, though the public was generally not happy with the reign of T or G. Unsure. It appears as though they were pleased with his choice of Damath to succeed him. Some argued that G didn't make the choice of Damath, but that Grandmaster Imas of the Guild of Maintainers made it. The matter was never officially settled, although most contribute the choice to G. Damath had joined the Guild of Maintainers at the age of 5, as most did, and risen to the level of Guildmaster by the time he was chosen as king. The selection was a surprise to much of the public, and apparently even to Damath himself. It was not a post he had especially desired to have. Almost immediately, Damath ordered a ban on all unnecessary links to be enforced by the Maintainers, while the council carried out emergency meetings trying to decide their stance on the outsiders. In these meetings, the council concluded that relations with the outsiders would continue, but with much stricter restrictions and guidelines. The list was long that Damath signed into law and included the restriction of any outsiders operating Denis machinery or linking books. Perhaps more importantly, the council and king sent a clear message to all of the factions who were against outsider involvement with Denis. Their ideas would not be tolerated if they led to any infraction of the rules previously established by Loshemanesh, which were to become strictly enforced. And though it was not stated publicly, oh my god, there's so many words. The Reliima, meaning the unseen, was apparently ordered to double its membership and fine any and all who were carrying out illegal activities with the outsiders. As well, Damath denounced the words of the Watcher as pure rubbish and nothing more than a desperate lonely man seeking attention. From Damath's speech, explaining to the people the findings of the council meetings. In 4721 DE, Damath pushed an amendment that forced the major guilds to accept a percentage of students who passed all entrance exams but could not afford the steep prices. By that time, the major guilds had become extremely expensive and a large majority of the population, even if qualified to join the guilds, had no way to afford it. It was the first such action in the history of Denis, and one that many seemed to question, especially the guilds themselves. However, Damath was able to convince them that it was a necessity for the society and one to which they cautiously agreed. Taken from the private journals of Guildmaster Reshan of the Guild of Archivists. In 4724 DE, records point to over 10 separate groups being convicted of the Loshemanesh laws, as they had come to be called. Most agreed that the Reliima played a large role in the convictions, although there are no official records of their involvement. Regardless, each of the convicted was sentenced to solitary confinement on prison ages. The convictions must have carried a powerful impact on the society, as the public still knew very little of the Reliima, if anything at all, and thus had no idea how so many convictions were occurring. As one writer said, there were stories of dark shadows and mysterious creatures for those carrying out such activities. It was said that the eyes of Damath saw everything while his arms took anyone he wanted. From Revealing the Unseen, written by Becharen in 5999. The crime rate, especially pertaining to the Loshemanesh laws, steadily lowered until 4752, when there were only 3 recorded convictions. In 4784 DE, an assassination attempt was carried out against Damath, resulting in the death of 2 members of the Reliima, who saved Damath's life in the process. The perpetrators were found, and 2 years later, Damath ordered their execution. It was the first execution of its kind and met with little resistance from the public or council. The 2 men were apparently linked into a death age, permanently ending their lives. Though most agreed with the execution, those who were against outsider involvement to begin with now felt even stronger in their case. Now, they argued, Denis is killing itself for the sake of the outsiders. Goshen, leader of the cult group Blood of Yavo, made the comment in a public speech. In 4826, Damath was rewarded for his efforts pertaining to the acceptance policies of the major guilds. The first of the Guild of Stonemasons, non-paying members, headed the effort to devise early fusion compounding technology, a building block for the eventual development of Nara. Damath praised the guild and the numerous opportunities that all citizens of Denis now had to benefit their society. The comments were made by Damath at the public announcement of the fusion compounding technology. In 4843, at the age of 305, Damath passed away, leaving the throne to his firstborn son. King Me'emen took the throne in 5240 DE at the age of 83. One of the biggest announcements of Me'emen's reign came rather quickly and was offered by the Guild of Miners and Stonemasons, who had worked together. In 5307, they revealed Nara, as it had been created in a laboratory weeks earlier, a metallic gray stone 30 times the density of steel and hardest of all Denis stones. Nara offered tremendous opportunities for mining and construction and ended up having a massive impact on future opportunities for Denis. Even at the time of its release, there was apparently much excitement about its potential. In 5312 DE, disease broke out in the industrial district of Denis, most likely originating in the age of Yassafé. Yassafé was mostly forest and provided Denis with a good portion of its wood supply, including the expensive and rare yama. The outbreak caused widespread panic, as many predicted another plague similar to what had occurred during the 2100s. Fortunately, the illness was not nearly as lethal as the aforementioned, and the Guild of Healers reacted extraordinarily fast in finding a cure. Regardless, there was again a new push to at least separate the Nehueril district far away from the city proper. The industrial district was formed during the reign of Nidra and served as an importation center for most outside goods. Me'emen apparently liked the idea quite a bit and encouraged the surveyors to begin looking into such an expansion. In 5359 DE, the Denis received another great reason to begin major expansion, and it came in the form of Stone Tooth. It was the second of the Great Diggers, and quite a bit more powerful and technologically advanced than the older Stone Eater. Me'emen immediately ordered the Guild of Miners to begin clearing an area, along with Stone Eater, for a new industrial district replacing Nehueril. It was not until 5475 DE that actual construction was begun on the new industrial section Uran. Less than 100 years after Stone Tooth, in 5473 DE, the Guild of Maintainers announced that the newly discovered Deratheni could be used to create much improved and much more protective maintainer suits. Though such an announcement may not seem especially important, the new suits ended up having a great impact on Denis culture. Since the maintainers were able to take bigger risks with their types of ages they could explore, the Guild of Riders were allowed to be a bit more liberal in their writing, and a new breed of age was begun. The newer ages allowed for much more experimentation with atmosphere, animal life, and energy sources. During Me'emen's reign, words became a common topic of discussion, and attention was again given to the older temples. Evidence points to numerous remodels and renovations of many of the secular temples that had been built years earlier on the new line of the Great Zero. It seems that Me'emen himself paid little attention to the religious pulse of his people, being much more interested in technological advancements and city expansion to care. Once, Me'emen felt that Stone Eater and Stone Tooth were no longer needed. He recommended using them to build an underground tunnel connecting the island to the city proper, and minimizing the need for boat travel. His proposition was not embraced by any means, especially by the upper classes who were living on the island. Apparently there were a number of protests for fear of the effect the tunnel could have on the island. The proposal was also rejected by most of the guild, causing Me'emen to not force it. In 5500 DE, the first imports from other ages were linked to the new Uran district, much further from the city. Uran was said to be a tremendous improvement over the older Nehueril, much more advanced, much safer. And there was tremendous celebration on the day of its opening. From the Journal of Grandmaster Veshar of the Guild of Stone Miners. Security was tight in the new district, as it was revealed later that the Reliima had uncovered a variety of plots intended to display some of the factions' disagreement with the district. In 5540 DE, Me'emen's only son became extremely ill and ended up passing away 6 months later. As a member of the Guild of Healers, Ashem was often among the first to investigate new ages to make sure of their safety in relation to disease. As a result of his death, the age was not approved until a cure could be found. Me'emen considered the actions of his son heroic and changed the name of the Uran district to Ashemen a year after his death. It was said that the death left Me'emen deeply saddened, devoid of the excitement he had shown throughout his reign. From the journals of the prophetess Trisari, assigned to King Me'emen. Many said it forced him to the prophetesses Trisari. It should be noted that the prophetesses had been assigned to all of the kings, but for the most part had become nothing more than figureheads rarely consulted. Me'emen apparently spent much time with the Trisari in his last days and was able to die a content man because of her. From Ashem, written by Ramena in 5589. Me'emen died in 5549 DE at the very ripe age of 392, and chose his nephew, probably on recommendation of Trisari, to succeed him. King Asemlef took the throne in 5999 DE at the age of 54. Asemlef inherited a people who were philosophically confused, the Watcher versus Gish versus the Great King/Tavar, but technologically advancing, many great construction, mining, and scientific inventions, expanding within the cavern at a great rate and moving towards diminishing the involvement of the outsiders within their culture. As well, the fighting that had scarred their past was at a minimum. From the Line of Karath, written by Fall in 6985. Asemlef continued the peaceful trends by attempting to isolate no one, but instead welcoming everyone and any beliefs they might have had. It seems he took no stance on any of the varying religious ideologies being passed around, and allowed any and all religious factions equal access to property, government health, etc. While disregarding no beliefs, he was able to hold his own, some of which were unknown to Denis up to that point. Though never stated publicly by Asemlef, common opinion and historical records point towards numerous servants being used by Asemlef, most brought from outside ages. More so were the apparent challenges Asemlef held with these servants. Details are hard to find, but it seems as though these challenges ranged from hunts by Asemlef himself to gladiator-style battles between the servants. It should be noted that regardless of what actions occurred, there was little public outcry against them. Instead of philosophical or religious beliefs, Asemlef instead focused on mining expansion, construction of the new districts, and offering equal opportunities of culture and social benefits to all classes. As far as outside involvement, Asemlef publicly argued that the order from his father to all of the guilds was not realistic, and that outside involvement would always be needed to some extent. Knowing the comment would anger some of the factions, he became the first king to publicly invite the more extreme factions, who wanted no outside involvement, to his palace for numerous talks on the issues. Though no decisions were made in the meetings themselves apparently calmed the factions and created a better overall feeling that the two could come to a decision in the future. Around the same time, two key writers from the Writers' Guild left to join the Writers of Yavo, worth mentioning as the Writers of Yavo would eventually become one of the three largest sects in all of Denis. Up until that point, the group who believed it was their duty to write the perfect age had been relatively small. After the Judgment Age, most of Denis believed one would either up in the Perfect Age or Jakuth's Age. Obviously, most wanted to live in the Perfect Age, but there were of course a variety of beliefs on how that was accomplished. Like the Writers of Yavo, most of the popular factions or cults of the day focused on Yavo in one way or another. The old cults such as the Tree and Sacred Stone had vanished for the most part, leaving way to disagreements in the beliefs of Yavo for the most part. Asemlef passed away in 6284 DE at the age of 339, leaving the throne to his third and youngest son. King Karath took the throne in 6731 DE at the age of 54. King Karath is probably the most well-known name of all the kings, not because he was necessarily considered the best, but because he was the last. His name came to represent all of the kings in the later years, including the renaming of the Arch of Kings to the Arch of Karath. His mother had raised him to follow the teachings of Gish, and by the time he took the throne he was believed to be a wholehearted believer in the followers. Because of that, and the experience of watching his father interact with his advisors, Karath had decided from an early age that a king was no longer the correct way that Denis should be led. At least, he argued, not until the true great king would come. The fact that Karath in a single reign was able to convince his people that the way they had been ruled for thousands of years was wrong and should be changed should be considered nothing short of miraculous. Karath carefully crafted his arguments as a benefit for the guilds more than anything else. After all, he argued, Denis is the guilds, let us be protected by their fortress and be ruled by their wisdom. It was hard for the guilds not to support a proposal that removed the king from the highest authority and replaced him with 5 lords that would be automatically chosen from the grandmasters of the guilds. It gave all of the power of Denis to the guilds, and there were only a few grandmasters who seemed to disagree. Those few were known as faithful followers of the great king, and Rhinaref, who had always supported the role of kings. Fortunately for Karath, though his people believed a variety of different philosophical ideologies, only those who faithfully followed the original teachings of Rhinaref and the great king were disturbed at the thought of no king. And it was the majority of Denis who no longer followed those beliefs, but instead those of Nemia, Gish, the Watcher, and various others. As a result, it was a cultural impact that the public had to overcome, and not a religious one. Taken from Karath's public speech in which he first proposed the idea. Karath, attempting to further please the guilds, recommended new renovations and additions to the council chamber and construction of a new guild hall, meant to celebrate the new power that would be theirs. A symbol of the new power of the guilds and lords, and further insult to the great king, burying his memory even further under government construction. Construction began in 6970 DE on the new guild hall. There was no better symbol of the attitude of the Denis in 6970 DE. The tomb of the great king was further buried under massive buildings dedicated to government and the guilds. By the end of his reign, Karath had convinced the majority of Denis of his own beliefs. Most claimed to be followers of Gish and his writings, and most viewed the outsiders as a threat. If not now, then soon, Karath often said. From The First Five, written by Tarvis in 7000. After his death, Karath's words would be proven true with the onset of the Me-Dis War. Outside factions invaded with attempts to destroy the ink-making and bookmaking guilds, and almost succeeded. By the time the war would end, there would be few left who did not follow Gish and thus believe in the end of most outsider involvement. The discovery that conservative factions had led to the start of the Mee-Dis War would come much later, when it was far too late to alter the conservative trends. Regardless, in 6977 DE, Kareth abdicated the throne and gave over the power of the kings to the first 5 lords of Dani history. They were Lord Tyri of the Guild of Messengers, Lord Hemela of the Guild of Healers, Lord Moleth of the Guild of Caterers, Lord Kedri of the Guild of Riders, and Lord Korinen of the Guild of Analysts. Kareth died 8 years later. The time of kings was over. Alrighty, and I think that is a good place to cut it. We have learned about various kings. We've learned about what they've done and sort of how Dani became what it was. And I think that's really interesting personally. But I'm really excited to learn more as we continue reading through the books in Uru. So thank you all so much for following my read through, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.